Thank you so much for this report. When you talk about political prisoners, and we talk about the Sergei Magnitsky law, let's first and foremost remember that Sergei Magnitsky was a political prisoner, that because of his work, he was really, exposing the Russian government for committing tax fraud. Bill Browder hired Sergei Magnitsky to go out there and expose what was happening and defend him in the court of law. And as a whistleblower, how did he pay? Well, he was arrested, he was beaten, he was tortured, and he died while incarcerated. We cannot let these things happen. And that's why I was proud when my conservative colleague, Senator Raynell Anderchuk, brought forward the Sergei Magnitsky law in the Senate. I was proud to sponsor it in the House of Commons. And at first, we got to remember that this was not well received by the government. Sergei Magnitsky law was denounced by Foreign Affairs Minister of the day, Stefan Dion. And luckily, working alongside Chrystia Freeland and like-minded liberals, we were able to convince the government that this was a piece of legislation that we needed to have. And by having now the Kremlin's political prisoners report, we not only are identifying so many political prisoners, 2/3 of them are being held because of their ethnic and religious beliefs. Because they are minorities, they have been captured and imprisoned, and so many others are being held on trumped-up charges. But this report also names those that are responsible. So in the first part, we can name them and shame them, but this is the information we need to actually go out there and start applying sanctions using the Sergei Magnitsky law right here in Canada. We can take a leadership role, and we do call upon the Government of Canada to implement more sanctions on those that are responsible for these gross human rights violations. The kleptocrats in the Kremlin, those that are abusing their positions of power and authority, cannot get away with it. And so we will work across party lines. We will put together a letter asking Minister Freeland and the Government of Canada to extend sanctions to these individuals that are responsible for what's happening in Russia, in Crimea, and throughout the region, and make sure that they cannot use Canada as a safe haven for their wealth, for the families, and that they are named and shamed, and their ability to move around the world becomes more and more limited. Again, thank you to the authors for this hard work, and it's through our efforts as parliamentarians and as human rights advocates to make sure that we put an end to these types of human rights abuses.
In 1975, when Andrei Sakharov wrote his Nobel speech, he named 126 prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union. This wasn't everyone, but it gave an idea. Today, according to the latest figures by the Memorial Human Rights Center, there are 296 political and religious prisoners in Russia today. This too is not everyone, just those who fit the criteria established by the Council of Europe, but it also gives an idea. While repression and lawlessness continue to rule in our country, the only defense, the only protection, the only hope for political prisoners is international attention. Back then, back in the Soviet era, prime ministers and presidents of democratic nations would put the issue high on the agenda, including by helping to negotiate the release, the exchange, or at least the improvement in conditions for prisoners of conscience. In 1978, Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau personally handed Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev the legal brief on the case of Soviet prisoner of conscience Anatoly Sharansky that was prepared by Professor Erwin Kotler. Unfortunately, nothing of the sort seems to be happening today. And whatever else Western leaders discuss with Vladimir Putin, the issue of political prisoners seems to be absent. As if it is normal that in the year 2019, a European country is holding hundreds of people in prison for political or religious reasons. It is time to break the silence, and we are grateful to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Canadian House of Commons for hosting the hearing this afternoon dedicated to the issue of political prisoners in Russia. We hope that Canada speaks out, but more than speaking out, we hope that Canada uses the Magnitsky legislation that you have on the books in this country to impose targeted personal sanctions against those who are responsible for politically motivated persecutions in Russia. There will come a day when the political prisoners of today are free, just as those prisoners of conscience became free in the Soviet Union. But until that day comes, we hope that Canada and our other partners in the international community will continue to speak up for justice on behalf of those who are deprived of it at home.
Another question here. One of the first individual listed in the report is President Putin. That would be a dramatic step if Canada were to add him to the sanctions list. Is there any reaction from members here today about what message that would send?
Who's the question addressed?
A strong message. An appropriate message.
Let me just say this. The number one name on Canada's Magnitsky list is Venezuelan President Maduro. So if we know that Vladimir Putin is responsible and directing all these human rights abuses, I would not know why we wouldn't add him to the sanctions list.
And also very quickly, I just want to reiterate what Jared has said a minute ago. One of the absolutely key names on this list is the name of Prosecutor General Yuri Chaika. He's been either Justice Minister or Prosecutor General for the entire 20 years of Vladimir Putin's rule. And he has been responsible for all the egregious political persecution that has been going on in our country. And it is frankly astonishing that so far, not a single one of the 6 countries that have the Magnitsky legislation in place, including Canada, have sanctioned this individual. I think it's high time to do so, and I hope that Canada leads the world in doing that.